Hey all, it's Mooch. Welcome to Minding Your mAhs episode 20. Today we're going to talk about how hard we can pulse our lithium-ion batteries. Can we know? It's a question I'm asked a lot, and let's dive into it. Now, some say you have to stay under the CDR, continuous discharge rating, in order to have any kind of degree of safety when pulsing the batteries. And others say you can go a lot higher than the CDR, the continuous rating, as long as the battery doesn't get hot. Which is it? There's some issues, background issues that get in the way of us trying to decide that I want to address first. Number one, no OEM cell has a pulse rating. Samsung, Sony, LG, Panasonic, Sanyo, all those. There are no pulse ratings. You might see a table posted somewhere that says, VTC, this VTC here or there, the 5 or the 4 or the 5A has this rating of amps for half a second and this for 5 seconds. Those are ratings for the protection electronics. It's a one-shot, emergency-only kind of rating to shut down the battery pack that these batteries are supposed to be used in, because we're not supposed to use them loose like this, separately. And it's not a rating we can use for a battery, because it doesn't tell you how many times you can do it or how close together they are or what the criteria is for setting, quote, the rating, unquote. Do they use cycle life degradation? Do they use a voltage sag? We don't know, because it's not a rating. It's just for the protection electronics. And then there's that Samsung 25R data sheet mention of 100 amp pulse rating. That's one time, and it damages the battery. You cannot pulse it, for half a second every 2 seconds. It doesn't say in the ratings, in the data sheet, how you can use that number. It's a one-time only kind of thing. It's a capability of the battery and not a rating. For the other cells, the rewraps and the China manufactured cells, their pulse ratings are useless. We cannot use them to judge how hard we can go ahead and safely pulse a battery. Number one, there's no standard for setting a pulse rating anywhere. Nobody has one. And even if there was a standard, how long of a pulse, time between pulses, the criteria used to set the rating, all the companies would have to use it so we could compare one battery to another. If only half the companies use it and half the companies don't, we can't compare any of those batteries. And a lot of these pulse ratings for the rewrapping companies have no safety basis or any basis other than, hey, this sounds good, let's set this number so we can compete in the marketplace. Now, another issue for setting or determining how hard we can pulse a battery is you need to account for aging. You might say, even if you could come up with a number, you can say, all right, that's great for a new battery. What happens a year later, 6 months later, 3 years later? Different vapers use batteries in different ways, different degrees of abuse, etc., and discharging, charging, storage. How do we account for that? How do we set up a rating that can say, oh, we're going to include that? It's something to think about. Now, a very important thing I hear from a lot of vapers is, well, I don't get it hot, so it's okay. Not being hot does not mean it's okay. You're not safe if it doesn't get hot. The spot heating in the battery. What you feel is warm on the outside can be a spot or two inside the battery that gets incredibly hot. But by the time the heat works its way out to the outside and spreads out, you've just got a warm battery. There's accelerated degradation of the battery inside. There's spot heating, which speeds up the aging and degradation at that point. Overall, it ages the battery faster, even if the battery's not getting hotter. All that increases the risks for trouble later on. And this is a big unknown, and you're going to hear this said for the rest of this video. We don't know what these things do in terms of this kind of abuse and this pulsing. I've looked at the literature. I've looked at tests, academic and industry papers. They talk about high discharge rates being 5C, 3C. So 3C for a 3,000 mAh battery would be 3 times 3,000, 9 amps, or 9,000 milliamps, or 9 amps. For 5C, for VTC 5A, that'd be 12.5 amps. That's considered a high discharge rate. We have vapors using the VTC 5A at 40, 50 amp levels. There's just no data on what's going on inside the battery, what kind of degradation, what kind of risks are building up at these kind of levels that vapors use these batteries at. Now, yeah, I know, you just want a fracking number and, substitute whatever word you want for fracking. I get it. It just seems like it'd just be so easy to come up with something reasonable. But we can't. What do we base it on? The thermal runaway threshold temperature? You know, hey, you're 5 degrees away, stop here. What kind of safety margin we set for that? How do we account for aging of that battery? The thermal runaway temperature might change. There are other things going on inside the battery. Oh, okay, do we base how hard we can pulse a battery on cycle life? You know, at this point, we go from a 500 cycle battery to a 300 cycle battery. Okay, that's as hard as you want to pulse it. Different vapors have different priorities and different preferences. Some don't care if they only get 50 cycles. They want to use it this hard to get the performance they want, or have a small enough mod that they want. Well, maybe we use voltage sag, pure performance. Well, different vapors will have different thresholds for what is acceptable for their voltage sag. So we might have a whole bunch of different numbers, even if we could come up with a number. And I know it just seems like we should just be able to come up with some kind of number, but because of these unknowns, it would have to be a very conservative number. Now, something else complicating things are we have different grade batteries out there. That's a slight problem because it changes performance, it changes how it ages, its capacity, its internal resistance, its internal heating, its self-heating, the spot heating, and also rewrap cells can change at any time. Whoa! So if we give a pulse rating, if we come up with the numbers, how hard we can pulse a rewrap battery, what if that battery changes? Change batteries are always an issue, but it's an issue for this too. There is one thing. We already have a number that we can use that gives you decent cycle life, decent performance, and a decent safety margin. And that's a continuous discharge rating. And I know you don't want to hear that, but that's the number that the manufacturers have set as the limit for decent use of this cell. You know, non-abusive, really non-abusive use of the cell. It's pretty abusive if you just constantly discharge it, always at the CDR. But they set an upper limit for it. It's not a starting point. It's not to go, yeah, that's continuous. We can go way above that. It's where they go, whoa, stop. So we have a number there. Now, you want a higher number. I know. You see other people vaping at 2-3 times the CDR and not blowing themselves up. That's not because it's safe. That's because they've been lucky so far. And we don't know the few incidents that happen out there if maybe using it that hard was the cause of the incident and not bad wraps or something like that. Now, as always, a higher pulse, you know, if you choose to pulse, a higher one means faster aging and more risks, unknown risks we can't quantify, that we can't say, oh, it's only 5%, you know, riskier. No, we don't have an idea if it's 5% or 500% riskier. In my opinion, the years of bullshit ratings that we've had from so many different rewrapping companies, and some of them are getting better, I think there's years of these really high numbers, and the fact that you don't just blow yourself up right away pulsing something once at above the CDR has led to some really unrealistic expectations for the batteries we have. We want to say, hey, this 20 amp battery can be used at 40 amps. That's okay, just be careful. Well, but truth, we just want to use it at that, and so we just say that because we want to use it at that. We don't know what's going on inside that battery. It's a really tough situation. We don't know what the risks are building up inside the batteries when you pulse them that hard. Even if we don't blow up right away, what are we setting in motion for a year down the road, 6 months down the road? And in pulsing a battery hard, let's say we use a VTC5A at 40 amps. Just pulsing it, doesn't get hot, it's a new battery. Well, we're in a lot of trouble if there's a mod malfunction where it auto fires, or with a mechanical mod, there's an accidental button press, it's in a pack or something, and either one of those circumstances discharges the battery continuously. Now it's being discharged at 40 amps. That doesn't guarantee thermal runaway in a bursting cell, but it might vent, it could set the atomizer or the cotton on fire, some other things. So it's just saying, hey, I haven't blown myself up, doesn't mean, oh, okay, we're all safe. Now, something at least we can do is look for signs of aging to say, whoa, I am abusing this battery, or I'm using it hard. I think I'm going to retire it now. Loss of capacity, which is loss of runtime. Your 4,000 mAh battery drops down to 3,000 mAh. It probably has a correspondingly shorter running time, vaping time for you. Consider start replacing it somewhere. The manufacturers typically around 20%. They start saying, hey, you've reached the end of life. Excuse me. So if you're using the battery the same way each time, and you're noting the capacity going back into the battery, the number of mAh, milliampere hours going back into the battery when you charge it, and that's dropped about 20%, yeah, it's time to replace that battery. If you see it discharging faster, if you just charge it up to 4.2 volts, 4.20 volts, and the next day it's down to 4.15 or lower, that's an indication of damage. That's an indication the battery's discharging internally. That's damage, and replace that battery. Certainly if the battery stays warm because it's self-discharging so quickly, absolutely don't touch it, don't charge it, don't do anything. If the battery runs warmer, for the self-discharge, I'd say 1 or 2 days later, if you're down 4.15 volts or lower, please don't ask me if 4.16 is okay. Use your best judgment. If on day one it's 4.16 volts, well, that's what the battery charges up to, or what your charger can do. But if it's 4.20 volts, then you accidentally short circuit it, you're wondering if it's still good, though I recommend not using it at all, and you put it on the charger, the next day it's down to 4.16, where the day before was staying at 4.20, I'd say that's a damaged battery, replace it. If the battery runs warmer at the same discharge level, power or same current level, well, that's a real indicator of higher internal resistance, internal damage. It's time to replace that battery. Capacity will probably be the first thing to go. Internal resistance, there's some meters out there, the Vapcell YR-1030, the 1030. It's Vapcell branded, but you can get it on AliExpress from multiple vendors. That's a fantastic AC internal resistance meter for batteries. Surprisingly accurate. The AC internal resistance is at a particular frequency. It injects a little AC signal at 1,000 hertz into your battery and looks at how the battery responds as the current goes in and out, like 100 milliamps at 1/10 of a volt. Very tiny. It doesn't do anything to the battery. But it only tells you what's going on at that frequency. To know what's going on in the battery, you need to run these tests at lots of different frequencies. And there's a whole field of science just around that, using these AC signals being injected in the battery to essentially examine through the reactions to this signal what's going on in the battery. That'll probably be the last thing to change. Your DC internal resistance and your capacity will change before that. We can't always assume trouble's going to be visible though. Certain types of damage, it can plate lithium onto parts of the battery and become metallic lithium, and that can grow the little fingers of dendrites you may have heard, little crystalline structures that can grow where they shouldn't grow and short two sides of the battery together. That takes time, and that may not show up as any one of these things until they decide to short circuit. If it's very tiny, a little spot heating. If it's a bigger short circuit, that can lead to catastrophic failure of the cell. Thermal runaway, bursting, flames, shrapnel, the end of life as we know it. It's terrible. A big concern I have is charging is when trouble can occur. You'll often hear vapers say, hey, I'll stop when it gets warm. Or, I've been doing this for 8 years, I've never had a problem. They're talking about when they're doing the discharging. I'm careful when I discharge. I keep my wraps intact. I don't let the battery get hot. That's good. But it doesn't tell you what's going on inside the battery. And charging is when trouble can occur. Why? We've got heat. Often the chargers let the heat rise up past the cells. Some chargers get batteries really freaking hot for low to moderate charging rates. You might be able to charge at 2 amps, relatively cool on one charger, but only half an amp at another charger, and the battery gets warm. That's bad for the battery if there's any internal damage in there. Your battery's at a higher voltage. That gives it more energy. So if anything does happen internally to the battery, there's more energy available to make it a worse circumstance. And I use energy here, but also more capacity, more ability to do damage. If you short circuit, or if an empty battery short circuits internally through those metallic dendrites, or who knows, the something else going on inside the battery. An empty battery's got very little energy, very little capacity left to do anything. It's not going to heat up that much. A fully charged one that may already be a little bit warm, there's a lot of energy ready to cause havoc if something goes on. So incidents where we may say, hey, I'm okay when I'm using the battery, but hey, what the hell just happened? My charger blew up or something. It may not have been the charger's fault. It may not be the wraps. It may have been things building up from pulsing hard. I don't know. I can't say. I can't give you numbers. I can't quantify that. But a large percentage of the incidents are just mysterious batteries blowing up in the charger. And you see it's an experienced vapor. I check the wraps every time I pull it out of the mod before I put it in the charger. And they're using a brand name mod. I don't think that's bad wraps or a bad charger every single time. Some of these incidents, and a large percentage of the incidents that happen during charging, are batteries that have been damaged to a point where, because of the extra energy and the heat, this is when they decide to go during charging. This affects how hard we can pulse a battery. It has to be taken into account when we just want that fracking number. But we have no way to quantify that. We have no way to say, ooh, charge does this. Okay, take 5 amps off this number. We just don't know. Now, a lot of vapors are way above the CDR, and I mentioned that before, and they haven't blown up. A lot of vapors, some vapors have gone over the CDR, and they have set fire to their batteries. They've blown themselves up. They're willing to take the risks. They want a particular mod size, a single battery mod, or whatever it might be, and they want that hot vape. They just don't want to carry a series mod, or they don't want to carry a 3 battery regulated mod or something for the particular vape that they want. This is the mod I want to use, and I want to run a 0.08 coil in this mech mod, and I'm going to use a 20 amp battery because that's what I have, and that's what I want to use, and I haven't blown myself up yet. But just understand that that is taking a risk, one we can't quantify, one we can't say how risky it is. Pulsing hard has a small chance of causing trouble, but the consequences are really big if there is trouble. Not blowing yourself up does not mean safe. It just means you've been lucky so far, and that's great. Yeah, I'll always go to the car analogy. You can go to work every single day at 100 miles an hour for the next 50 years and never crash. All your friends can do that and never crash. But anybody could get into a car and do that and crash the first time. Why? Because there was always risks doing that, driving 100 miles an hour to work every single day. It's just when those risks come in, into play and turn into something that actually happens. It's the same things with the batteries there, which is why we try to not bring the risks up higher. We find ways to keep it lower when we know how. And for pulsing, it's using a lower level. As I mentioned before, unknown long-term risks, which increase. I mentioned testing has only gone up to 5C. Low levels compared to how hard we abuse a battery. I can't find any industry or academic research papers that point to what's going on and how can we start to quantify what battery chemistries might be able to handle it. What sizes, temperatures, cycles, before there's an unreasonable risk, let's say at running a 20 amp battery at 30 amps or 40 amps. I can't find any information that can help us. Your performance and cycle life are really crappy too when you're pulsing it really hard. You've got huge voltage sag, your battery's not going to last as long because of the accelerated aging. So there are other reasons beyond just safety or increased risks to not pulse a battery as hard maybe as you are. Now, we can't say what is okay or not okay for pulsing. We can't issue numbers. Staying under the CDR is not safe. There's no totally safe use of these batteries, but it certainly helps. Yeah, and I actually wrote this out because in my mind I'm thinking, yeah, that sucks. CDR, what the hell? That's the manufacturer's upper limit. That's already abusive if you're running at it all the time. But that's the only number that we can point to and go, yeah, stay below that. Anything above that, even as you're approaching the CDR, the risks start going up, and we don't know what's going on over the long term. We have to recommend it because of the unknowns. You can try a better battery. You can try a lower mass coil so you don't at least have ramp ups, so at least your pulses are shorter. If you're using mechanical mods, you can go to a series mech where the current is a lot lower and you can still get higher power levels, or go to, as I squeezed it in there, a multiple battery regulated mod. If you've got a single battery mod at 80 watts, that battery's being, any battery, that's using that battery really hard. Well, if you go to a 2 battery mod at 80 watts, well, now you've got 40 watts per battery. Now, hopefully, those batteries are just cruising along because you've got, at least 20 amp batteries in there, if not higher, and you're set. It's a bigger mod. I know, there's a trade-off, but you've just dropped your risks a lot. If you keep the wraps in good shape, if you charge them responsibly, stuff like that. Now, we're all adults. We can choose the level of risk we want to take. I recommend not going over the CDR. I ask that you don't recommend going over the CDR to other people. I see a lot of people say, hey, yeah, I vape a 0.05 on a mechanical mod, but don't you do that? Well, of course they're going to do that. Of course they're going to do that because they see you survived it so far. I would just say, hey, just tell them, look, dude, you're just starting out. Stick with the CDR. You can get a damn good vape with that. There are 35 amp batteries out there. That's a lot of power. That's 110 watt vape or something like that. Or you can go to a multiple battery mod and pick any freaking power level that they want. I just ask that you, to someone else who's just starting and asking you what they can vape at, to stay at the continuous discharge rating. Let them learn about battery safety, battery capabilities, the way that they want to vape, and then they can make their own choice for the level of risks they want to go to because, after all, they're an adult too. Now, the bottom line is we can't say how hard we can pulse a battery. We can't give you any numbers, but we can do things in terms of replacing, not waiting years to replace a battery. If you use a battery hard, don't charge it hard. Pay a lot of attention to what's going on, why you're using the battery. I can't tell you when something might be a problem or when not. I can't say, oh, you have to replace it after 6 months or you have to replace it after 1 year. But think about replacing them more often. Don't allow these unknown risks to build up for a longer time. Go on an accelerated schedule for replacing batteries. Right now, that's the best we can do. Hopefully someday there's some kind of information for some battery that's popular for us that we can start to go, hey, we're really getting a good idea how we can use these batteries certain ways and how hard we can pulse them. And here are a couple of recommendations right now is where we can go. There are temperature limited ratings for some batteries like the VTCs and a couple other batteries that say, hey, if you don't get the battery hot, typically 75, 80 degrees Celsius, which is fracking hot, you can't even hold it, then you can use it at this certain higher level. Make the best of those. What is it, the VTC 5A, I rated at 25 amps, and I think I gave it a 30 amp temperature limited rating. And some other batteries are up to 40 amp temperature limited rating. Use those. If you start pulsing batteries up 40 amps, consider multiple battery mods and certainly replacing the batteries on a faster schedule. I wish I had better news. I wish I had hard numbers for you. I'm asked this sometimes dozens of times a day for these numbers, but we just can't come up with numbers that we can use for our community. That's all for today. Thank you for watching.